Thank you very much, Karen, and we'll welcome everybody to today's, well, one of today's CyberFest events. We've got two today, this event now, and then there's the season finale, which is at 6 o'clock tonight at the, I'm trying to think what the name of the brewery, it'll come to me in a minute, but there you go, down in Lisbon. So can we have the next slide, please? Whoever's working the controls. Trish, thank you very much. Okay, so I just wanted didn't want to say too much, but I just wanted to talk a bit about Cyber North, which is the cybersecurity cluster for the Northeast region. We're working to position the region as a great place to do cybersecurity business. We've got about, I say 70 business, but I think it's more like 80, 85 businesses in the region that are selling cybersecurity related services, right from things like such as pen testing, to reparation, to training, education, that kind of thing, consultancy. So we've got four legs to our stool. The first is to raise awareness of the Northeast region as an excellent place to deliver cybersecurity services. Newcastle is the only city outside of London with 2 academic centres of excellence. So we've got some real strength in the region. If you think of organisers in the public sector, DWP, HMRC, the NHS BSA, they're all here in the region. So we've got some real strength around that and things like advanced manufacturing, offshore renewables. So some great opportunity to build, raise awareness of the region and build businesses around that. So our second leg is to support those existing businesses to grow, working with them to raise their profile, but more importantly, I think working to collaborate with each other. Most of our businesses are small, and it's ideal for us to encourage collaboration, cooperation in a competitive environment to allow them to pitch for bigger national and global business. The third leg is we've been working with Newcastle University, Accenture, Northumbria University, and Plexel, who's to run the London Office of Rapid Cyber Advancement, to create an innovation centre in cybersecurity here in the region, which will either both allow people who have ideas around products or services for cybersecurity to commercialise them, to monetize them, providing business support, or if that's not successful, to create highly employable people who can go and feed the rest of the sector. And that brings us nicely into the fourth leg of our chair, is to address the skill shortage that we have within the region. Most industries, most sectors have some sort of skill shortage. But having thought about this a bit more, I think it's actually an experience gap that we have. Got a lot of skilled people in the region. I mean, there's 5,500 students going through the studying computer sciences in the 5 universities at the moment. So it's not necessarily skills as the problem, but that application to business is something we need to address. Okay, last slide, I think, from me. It's great, just to remind you, CyberFest, oops, go back one, thank you. Yeah, just to remind that with CyberFest, this is its 5th year. We've had, every year I sit down and say, right, we're going to do fewer events this time. We ended up with 17 this year somehow, and I'm very grateful for people like Karen who've put on all these events. If you want more information about Cyber North, cybernorth.biz. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Over to Karen and Johanna.
Yeah, because this is probably a relatively new area to people around ethics and cybersecurity, what we're going to do first, before we introduce corporate digital responsibility, which is CDR, we thought we'd just do a brain warmer and a jam board. So over to Johanna to introduce us.
Hey, I'm Johanna, and as Karen said, just gonna kick off this brain warmer, get us thinking about ethical practices and cybersecurity. So it's a Google Jamboard. I'm going to pop the link in the chat. So if everyone could just give me a shout when they've got that up, if they're seeing it, that would be great. I've got a thumbs up from Andrew, thumbs up from in this room, from Phil, and anyone on the chat. Just drop a thumbs up. Thanks, Colin. Trish, can you screen? Yeah, great. Can you go back one board to the first board, please? Yeah, so just in case you haven't used Jamboards before, this is just a little guide. So how to post on the board. So if you saw how Trish just moved through the boards at the top, you'll see 1 out of 9. Use those arrows to make your way through. We'll be moving the second board. Can we go back to the first board, Trish? Just want to show people where the post-its are. Let's not give it all away. So you'll see this giant black arrow. It's pointing to the 4th icon on the side that looks very much like a post-it. You just click on that, you can choose your colors, you can type whatever, you click save to post. If you greatly regret what you posted, just click back on your post-it to edit it. Really straightforward. We could go to the first board now. Well, really second board. Yep. So this is what we want to kick off the thoughts on. Are you aware of any ethical practices that are used by cybersecurity practitioners? And can you list some, just drop some post-its here and we'll talk in a bit. Also, if you're having any troubles using it, just pop your answers in the chat and I'll get it onto the board for you as well.
We did warn everyone that this might be an interactive session. Come prepared to work hard for it.
It's a post-it, it's anonymous. No one's gonna know it's your post-it. I think your names are like anonymous giraffe and stuff, if you've noticed anyway, so we won't know.
And actually, if you're not aware of any ethical practices, or if it absolutely means no sense to you in your day job, then put that as well, please. You know, all this feedback is super important for us. It's a good shout, actually, to have things like GDPR flagged up and where legislation's actually imposing ethical practices. Interesting about the self-policing element. Definitely seen a number of corporates come up with their own principles and look to apply those and interpret those in their own specific context. We've seen also the groups and their own governance rules and actually, you know, understanding how that gets imposed between contractual parties. And whatever hasn't been specifically regulated against is deemed acceptable. I hear that person there. I hear it very loudly. It's a well-known approach for corporates. Do we have any more takers?
What do we say? We want to make it 5 post-its. So, oh, we've got a 5th, Trish. Oh, we've got 6, Trish.
Really interesting to hear about whether or not the cybersecurity aspects, whether you've got a red hat team, a white hat team, a grey hat team, or a black hat team. Yeah, absolutely. With either penetration testing or other ethical hacking means. Nope, I love that. Great, loud and clear note. I shouldn't laugh. No, it's a very serious issue actually today, so it's really highlighted quite a lot for us. And interesting that it's thought to be kind of global risk constructs or global risk committee or global risk teams role, and not something that's shared across the organization. I think we've done well, Johanna, on 7. Oh,
look, one last coming in. Yep, so last call for post-its, and then I think we can get into our stuff.
Yeah, so there's ethical practices that can be applied both as a user of systems and also those who are generating reports from systems. So absolutely see that one as well. And actually what's done with the metadata that comes out of a user's profile and user's activity, where you've got control and access protocols in place. Right, I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment and go back to our standard presentation. Bear with me. Okay, so we've done the Jamboard. Over to Karen.
Okay, so as I said, the reason you signed up, maybe you've heard of CDR or not heard of CDR. So what this stands for is corporate digital responsibility. And some of you might say, okay, well, we've already got corporate social responsibility. But as many of us have witnessed during lockdown, etc., and COVID, a lot of people have been forced into using digital tools to communicate like this, to keep in touch with family during the pandemic. And this has also pushed the cashless system debate and cashless finance debate forward quite significantly. What corporate digital responsibility does is to think about what you're doing as an organization within your organization. So as the Jamboard highlighted, who's responsible, which roles delegated to think about ethics and ethics by design in your role as cybersecurity, but also by the organization. So when you're protecting your organization through cybersecurity tools, also thinking about the user, and as we saw there on the Jamboard, user reports, what happens if something goes wrong, an unintended consequence of something that your organization has designed, and the impact on you as a cybersecurity specialist. So we have issues around, there's always threats, there's always technological advances, and there's always a lot of expectations now that cybersecurity will always be on top of that situation and keep it moving. What CDR does is looks at the social, the economic, and the environmental impact. So we've all heard of SDG, social developmental goals, and environmental social governance. This is what this takes into account and gets us to think more about data and digital governance, but also the ethical decisions behind that. And that has not really been taught. I know somebody mentioned there was ethical hacking courses at universities, but we only introduced it a couple of years ago, actually including ethics, digital ethics as part of a module course for computer scientists. So we also have a skills gap. So what CDR does is look at those three domains, the social, the economic, and the environmental, and thinks about what are the responsibilities of data and digital within and by your organization, and whose responsibility is it anyway. So what Trish is going to do now, she's going to go through the key principles, which will give you more insight, and you can think about how it applies to you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that, Karen. So fundamentally, at its core, Karen's explained kind of wider ecosystem context of it, but corporate digital responsibility has 7 core elements to it: purpose and trust, fair and equitable access for all, promote societal well-being, consider economic and societal impact, accelerate progress and impact economy, creating a sustainable planet to live, and to reduce the tech impact on climate and the environment. And so with that, I'm going to just zoom in on some of those principles. And what this means. So the overarching aspect of this is the social, economic, environmental, and technological impacts that corporate digital responsibility and digital technologies bring to the table. And one of the first tenets, as I've already said, is purpose and trust. And this is really about an organization taking digital at the heart of its corporate responsibility, protecting both its reputation, but the trust in the organization, and that where it comes from its employees, its ex-employees, as many of you will have known with regard to security issues, customers and other shareholders and stakeholders. This isn't just about shareholder capitalism, this is wider stakeholder capitalism, recognizing that your purpose and trust and significance as an organization can be as easily impacted by others in the ecosystem, up the supply chain and down the supply chain, as it can be by yourself. So it's so super important for, certainly for cybersecurity professionals, to think about who's getting access to your system, why they're getting access to the system, what they're going to do with your system, and the data and the knowledge and the intelligence it is protecting. So this is where, with purpose and trust, what an organization can look to do is publish digital responsibility code, look about enhancing and promoting its corporate purpose and how that impacts and influences every aspect of its life as a corporate entity and its employees, looking at the social dynamic, the economic dynamic, the environmental dynamic, and as I say, the technological dynamic. And this is where it also is about communicating your purpose and building that trust in it, because you want to demonstrate that you do have responsible digital governance in place, and really, speak about it, talk about it, let others know about it in a way that obviously doesn't allow for gamification, but in a way that enhances trust in you as an organization and your systems. With that as well, no further ado, the second one, we're going into is about fair and equitable access for all. And while that doesn't seem so relevant for cybersecurity professionals, the issue we have here is that the systems that you're securing are the ones that will have to be able to be accessible by others. You know, from a diversity perspective, an equity perspective, a justice perspective, the systems that you're making available, the data you're making available will influence decisions about product and potentially other products and services that will have an impact on people's lives in all manner of guises, and may well also impact the diversity and equity of those decisions being made because of how that system is being made digitally inclusive. You know, if it's not able to be accessed on all formats, on, you know, whether it's on the internet, on the World Wide Web, or on a device in a different PCP protocol, not just an IP or TCP protocol, you know, what does that mean, and how does that then range and diversify your audience for your product and services? So it's thinking about that and the security that comes with that along that journey. You've got a variety of APIs being plugged into your system, that will also impact, you know, where ultimately the devices or the sensing or IoT devices are being plugged into your system that will possibly cause security issues later on down the line. And it's also worthwhile thinking for an organization, not just about the systems, but about your people. And this is where corporate digital responsibility is taking a holistic approach, because this is about being not just a responsible in your systems and your products and services, but being responsible in your employment relationships, thinking about the local community or communities from whom you're employing and resourcing your talent and acquiring your talent and retaining your talent. So it's about also being a responsible employer. They're thinking about the equity and the diversity and inclusive makeup of your teams actually within the cybersecurity stratosphere as well. We've got promote societal well-being as a third tenet of CDR, and this is about protecting data, personal privacy, and actually empowering people to engage and develop skills and protect them from themselves, and knowing that you're protecting them from harm or damage at every level of the product or service or system that's being made available, and being protected from security breaches. And so at the end of the day, the golden nugget, the treasure trove that cybersecurity professionals are often protecting is that intelligence and that information. And at the end of the day, whether that's personally identifiable information or not, this can have impact on people's lives, whether it's about, you know, taking down a system that people need to have access to on a day-to-day basis for decision making, or whether it's about people need to have access to a service to enable them to be empowered to go about their daily lives, whether that's maybe energy infrastructure, whether that's financial services, as Karen's already alluded to. You know, having access to the systems is as much as in of itself about protecting the data concerning people being empowered, having autonomy with their lives, and having an element of privacy. So it's how these systems interconnect with one another as much as what the system is actually looking to connect. So from a CDR perspective, what the CDR principles look to do and seek to implement, ask for in an organization, is implement strong data protection practices, really have an eye on the ball for digital privacy. What does that really mean? Promote digital security skills within your organization, and also think about, what does this mean for well-being? What does this mean from a human to human interaction perspective when people are engaging with your devices? Whether you are thinking about, if you're a gaming company, because certainly where I am in the UK, in the East Midlands, we've got a large number of gaming companies, and thinking about the well-being that means ultimately for the end users. If you think about it from a healthcare perspective, we've mentioned a number of organisations who are in the northeast of England who have responsibility for healthcare of people across the globe, and also for, not just in the UK, but further afield. And just think about, what does this mean for well-being? If their data, or if information that's personally sensitive gets out the door because the system's been hacked, that will also have detrimental impacts on people's thinking and how they respond to trust with your organization, but trust in the system more widely as well. Sorry, I'm going on a bit, but just thinking about all these principles, they have real life impact. So just going to the next one, thinking about, consider the economic and societal impact. This isn't just about, you know, PR and reputational impacts. This is about the bottom line and the financial impact this is going to have to an organization. It has an economic impact to an organization if there's a security breach and if people don't take corporate digital responsibility seriously, but it also has an economic and societal impact on the individuals and the families and the SMEs that get impacted if that security is breached, or if someone hasn't taken responsibility for the digital systems that they've implemented, whether that's from a security, from a data perspective, or whether it's an accessibility, integrity, reliability perspective. All of these potentially can have an impact on a third party, individual or company. And this is why it's so important to have transparency with your stakeholders, to ensure them, to show them exactly what's going on, when it's going on. If you have had breaches, whether it's of data or of your systems, so far as is possible, be transparent about it, be clear about it, get that reliability and integrity with the ecosystem. Say, look, we see that there's been an issue. This is how we have and are resolving it. This is how we're going to learn from this and get feedback for future. So there's lots that you can do to build that strength in economic and societal impacts that do happen from time to time because of cybersecurity breaches and the likes. Moving on now to where the CDR rubber hits the road, so to speak. This is about asking organisations to really help accelerate the progress with the impact economy. It's not just about looking to do what's, modus operandi, day-to-day practices and updating those. It's also about accelerating what it looks like in terms of consumption, whether it's small to medium-sized businesses, whether it's individuals. What does the demand for more ecologically responsible, ethical and societally better products and services look like? So whether that's an organisation that is promoting and incubating clean tech, or investing in sustainable and societal impact initiatives, whether it's anything like that, or whether it's simply just you are explaining to your customers that we are making these measures and putting these in place because we want to make sure that we are being more socially, economic, environmentally responsible for the future. And we're changing our technology, we're making our technology more secure, we're implementing practices and policies and processes in place. We're skilling up our labour force so that they are fully much more aware of the ethical issues and the privacy impacts that can happen, because if there's a failure in, as I say, one chink in the chainmail, in terms of your armour, which cybersecurity does present, then that makes the whole system or a good part of the system fall down and fall over. So this is really about generating the system for the future and the kind of economy and ecosystem that we all want to practice in for more ethical and environmentally impactful products and services. So then we're looking at our sixth principle before we go to our seventh, is about creating a sustainable planet to live. So I don't know how many of you in your own organizations get to think about the environmental impact and the carbon footprint of your cybersecurity systems, not just your wider systems and data centers or servers and stacks and racks that you're running. And so there is an element here where we're looking to ask businesses to report the business impact that they have in terms of what do they do in terms of creating a more carbon neutral, carbon negative ecosystem for their products and services. What commitments have they made to the UN SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, in terms of reaching that net zero by 2030? So there's a whole lot of other things that can be brought about to help promote the reputation of the business, but also to be thinking about all the different elements of the services that go on behind the scenes in an organization, including the reliance and impacts third-party organizations have. So thinking here, it's all well and good. An organisation may be able to say, well, we in the UK are offsetting our carbon, we are making ourselves net zero. But then you find out that they've outsourced to a cloud provider who's based out in, Far East or Middle East, and fundamentally that organisation and their supply chain isn't. So that actually makes the whole system for that organisation a little bit more untrustworthy, a little bit more vulnerable. That it's important for the organisation to think about its holistic product offering from end to end, with its supply chain, to see and get credible, perhaps third-party assessments to help for them to report saying, look, every element of our supply chain, we've put this in place in contractually, we've gone and audited it and said, actually, yes, we can find by this third-party assessment that they are improving or at a stage of excelling in their own corporate sustainability and carbon net neutral policies. So there's a whole element there that can be done to help promote trust, promote corporate digital responsibility, just in this area of creating a sustainable planet to live. And we'll have a bit of an interest in this, right? You know, we want to, this is truly an existential risk that we face. This isn't just something that's a nice to have anymore. So I think this takes CDR to make organizations think about innovating and having a positive impact beyond the corporate boundaries, but thinking about a wider humanity and humanitarian risk and the differential that we see not just in Europe, but across the globe in terms of the economic and environmental impacts of our businesses. And last but not least is about reducing the tech impact on the climate and environment. So this is where it's demonstrating for an organization that they have an environmental IT strategy. What are they doing to mitigate their own impacts because of the technology they create? You know, we're coming into a phase of more and more businesses are looking, or doing edge computing, but also more and more are doing digital twinning, quantum. These all have extra carbon loads, and it's thinking about from an organization perspective, what does this mean to our carbon footprint? How can we mitigate that? What are we doing to just offset it? Are we buying more forests, or actually doing something to put our server stacks and racks in a more cooler country, placing them maybe in Iceland, for example, which can naturally use natural resources to help the data rooms and the data centers be cooler by external natural environmental factors rather than using extra energy for cooling devices themselves. There's lots of things you can think about, even where it comes from either the data that you're securing or the systems that you're needing to sit on cloud-based environments. And there's many opportunities there. But with all of this, make sure that you measure it, you report it, you shout about it, you know, demonstrate this. But if it says it in your environmental IT strategy, report on it, make it public, make it known. And where possible, you know, think about your supply chain, move to more renewable energy resources and sources. You know, how much of a commitment can you say when you're using and consuming energy, whether it's electricity or gas or otherwise, how much of it comes from renewable sources? And it's about demonstrating that as an organization. And this final kind of badge is where organizations have signed up and been zooming in on these principles and looking to apply them in their organizations. People can sign up to a manifesto with corporatedigitalresponsibility.net and have an opportunity to become a sponsor and a supporter of this. And with that badge, it also is about coming back to that first principle again about purpose and trust. You know, you're advocating it, you're looking to use it in your organization, you're shouting about it, and hopefully making a difference one step at a time, one organization at a time. And so with that, I hand over to Karen.
Yeah, so the analogies we've talked about there, about there are a lot more expectations on cybersecurity across a broader sector than people perhaps understand. And I see there's a comment there from Stuart, there needs to be commitment to organisational continuity via generating future funds. There does, but purpose, you can still generate a profit, but also have purpose and trust as your central goals. Harvard Business Review quoted that companies who have purpose as a central objective actually outperform those who purely pursue a purpose, because there's more engagement around all different facets that Patricia has just described around CDR. So the reason we picked the analogy of the castle is because, you know, the castle and the moat scenario, you were trying to build that fortress so that people can't attack it, can't attack what you're doing for organizations, and also to make sure that hackers can't get in through back doors, etc. So when we talk about how does CDR relate to cybersecurity, people I've been talking about is because they are facing an increased amount of threats, an increased amount of attackers coming from all different sources, like we've talked about, ex-employees with a grudge, then take details, know where the back doors are, might attack you there. So I'm speaking to financial companies as well, their cybersecurity is second to none, and they try to keep away and constantly working, because you are protecting people's ultimate access to transacting and making their daily lives a bit easier. So this is why we're using the analogy of the castle, and Trish is going to move on and dig down a bit further into the details of protecting information, the intelligence that you're responsible for.
So fundamentally, just coming to Karen's point, you know, you are the castle, you are the guardians, and you're the guardians of this information and intelligence that your systems that you are overseeing, that you're working with, that you're building upon, that you're buying in services and products for to keep up to date, that you're maintaining legacy systems, that they all have things about them that you're a guardian of. And whilst we see the central tenet is about information intelligence more often, that doesn't always have to be personally identifiable information. There are so many other aspects that your day-to-day lives have to face. And I think people kind of often disregard or don't think about the cybersecurity aspects as being so fundamental to the running of day-to-day digital businesses in this day and age. And I think the role of cybersecurity has become so much more important since COVID than prior to it, because of the increased digitization we're facing. And whether it's ransomware attacks that are ever more increasing, and not least from the geopolitical gameplays we're seeing at a national and governmental level, but because of the number of devices coming online, because of the ingenuity and innovation that's happening in new products and services. We mentioned about financial services, we've mentioned about open banking. There's so many opportunities for more application processing interfaces to be put into place, which, because of the kind of code that is replicable there's so many risks for that being a data or a place of point of entry for vulnerabilities. You've got issues with people moving from their own perhaps hard racked and stacked servers to cloud, and there's so much more now reliability and resilience that's required in the cloud environment, because if the cloud goes down, your products and services go down. And so whilst we're relying on cloud, and people, certainly end user consumers, don't necessarily think that there's a tangible server somewhere in a bomb-proof, fireproof or flood-proof room, but that is the way it is, and we know this. But as cybersecurity professionals, there's an urgency and a need to ensure that that cloud environment is protected, it has integrity, and it can be resilient to the attacks it faces. And whilst we've talked about some of the kind of more physical and technological attacks that can be there, we know that a large majority, and I can't give you stats here, but I'm sure you'll have them in your back pockets, of the failings in security tend to be humans. And that doesn't necessarily need to be the cybersecurity professionals themselves. It is more so that the end users, where there's phishing, or literally someone's left a door open, they've been physically tailgated and someone's had access in a building, whether or not you've got people who have just left their computers open while they've nipped for a cup of coffee or a drink by the water cooler. There's a whole variety of failings that are often physical as well as the technological that cause the cybersecurity headaches. And then we've also mentioned about insider and revenge attacks and people deliberately coding in back doors. We've got software vulnerabilities, whether it's from legacy systems or third-party systems. And with the AI environment that we have, and either general purpose AI or AI as a service or AI ops, we're also seeing that there, with the number of people in the game, in the ecosystem of delivery of products and services in this day and age, it's no one software provider anymore. There's a variety of different people from whom you might buy the data, from whom you might buy the model, or you might get the code. Some of it's open source. So that there's greater challenges for you, who are the guardians, as I say, of the cyber galaxy. So, and I could go into more detail here, but we've got, and you'll know yourself, once people have got through your firewalls and got through your security techniques and breached your security, whether known or unknown, and I really hope in most cases they are known, we've also got issues where people are perhaps externally not even doing that, and are just using and gamifying the system to bring about a certain amount of data poisoning, so that you've got machine learning that goes awry because you've got people on the outside who are deliberately and intentionally changing your system and the outputs it creates. So that is also one thing that's become a greater concern and a newer concern, and is also something that organizations need to stand up for responsibility as to how can they identify those kind of attacks early on in the process. And with, as we said, with COVID earlier on, there has been an increasing number of organizations who've said, right, we appreciate you working from home. Our delivery infrastructures for getting devices to you is different now, and do you want to go and choose your own device? Or if you're working from home in a remote location, bring your own device anyway. And that then brings challenges because of how people log on, whether they have a VPN, whether or not the way that they log on in their home environment is secure or secure enough to a sufficient level. Depends on the device, depends on how up to date they keep the devices, all these considerations that will keep anyone awake at night. But this all comes down to, and without going into the kind of disasters, acts of God and environmental impacts, that some of the security systems, if that was a security system for, Sizewell B or C or D, or other, nuclear power stations, you'd want to be sure that, that security was battened down and absolutely guarded 100%. And so with all of these things, what this tantamountly boils down to is about responsibility. And this is about building up purpose and trust for an organization. And where you can see the trends where this is breached, where the cybersecurity walls fall down, this is a fundamental part of corporate digital responsibility, because this can have impacts on real people's lives, on real decision making, and on timely access to information. So I'm going to hand back to Johanna now, who's going to take us back to her Google Jamboard. So I'm going to stop sharing and try and share the Google Jamboard. But these are the questions we'll be looking to get you to talk about and answer. So Johanna, are you with us? I'm handing back over to you.
Yep, I'm here. We're just all in a room together with field tasks in hand. So switching over to avoid horrible feedback noises for everyone's benefit. So it's the same link. I'll pop it in again though to the chat. Trish, you want to share the board again on your screen?
Yep, just working it through now. Bear with me. As I open one screen, as I'm sure you all appreciate, lots of other screens open up. So fantastic. So hopefully we're on the right board. No,
yep. So let's go to the next board.
Fantastic.
So as Trish was saying, let's get an idea of your thoughts on feelings on these different topics. CDR, responsible AI, data ethics, sustainability. Just pop your post-its under the coding column. Let's see how we go.
I noticed put the comment about it being an extension of CSR. No, it's not, because you're dealing with actually the digital arena, which is completely different to the social side. It actually embodies the social, economic, and the environment. So there are debates in the academic literature about whether it's an extension or whether it's an entirely different topic. And we're on the side that it's different, because there are so many issues around what you're doing with data and digital and how that cuts across the whole organization, that it's not an extension of CSR, because CSR doesn't really take into account the full extent of how digital has changed our lives, particularly after COVID. I don't know if you want to add to that, Patricia.
Yes, basically what we had been finding, and certainly in my own corporate practice world, is CSR tended to be a nice charitable extension of an organisation, that it would be seen to attribute to local society. It would perhaps, make key engagements to employ people from local areas, but it didn't quite think about the digital impacts of the products and services. In fact, actually, CSR was more often than not, never the twain should meet. Actually, you've got your services and your business as a modus operandi, but let's report on how many paper towels we're not using in the organization. Let's report on how much charitable giving we're giving, not on kind of potential real life impacts for products and services, so that they weren't really affecting share price, if you like. So that I think is where there's a real extension. And CSR also has been historically very much a voluntary exercise. So, only if you're in, some of the white book companies, the FTSE 50, FTSE 100, would you really have some increase the requirement to have some transparency reporting. So it was a much in terms of a give or take. So in terms of digital, we haven't seen that in CSR. That's the new thing, but it is also applied cross piece, not just in the social aspect, not societal aspect.
Yeah, Phil's just popped in the chat there saying what he meant is CDR an extension of the company's responsibility to society rather than an extension.
Absolutely, I would concur with that, Phil, definitely. Yeah, and it is about responsibility taking, and we're in a time in society, I think, if nothing else, COVID's shown us, and the wave that we have of AI innovation and quantum innovation and other emerging technologies, and I mentioned digital twins earlier on, is about this idea of, where's the responsibility lie with organizations, and it's not just about the individuals. I saw someone mentioned earlier on about data is the property of the owner, and to manage and control it as they decide. And that's a really interesting piece to think about, because intangible assets such as data more often than not aren't property, and that's why we have a Data Protection Act and the idea of data controllers and data processors. So no one's seen as the data owner per se. But yes, I agree that where there's perhaps business information and confidential information, trade secrets, there could be an element of ownership in that information. But the idea of data being property, it really does depend if it's personally identifiable information or if it's kind of business industrial information. But there is a real data ethic around that, in terms of what, even if you perceive you are the owner of that, you're a custodian, you've got opportunity to show that you're going to be a responsible custodian of that information or that data, and what you choose and how you choose to use it in tandem, in co-partnership with the people about whom it's actually about.
There's also notes here, there's a few about responsible AI. How easy is it to make it responsible? There is a trade-off, and this is why we're pushing for CDR, and that links to another post on there. My concern that AI is developed because we can rather than we should, and it's difficult to assess the unintended consequences. But because we have seen unintended consequences coming out, we have to go back to thinking about ethics by design, because it hasn't been done. Yes, AI has been built because we can, a bit like the steam engine. We didn't fully understand the steam engine or how that worked, but we still built steam engine, and then that progressed the innovation. That's one argument. But what you find with responsible AI and explainability, etc., that somebody else has mentioned, is there can be a trade-off, because we want it explainable in human terms, which is currently up for debate, but not technically possible to the level that we extend without a trade-off of the accuracy of the machine learning model aggregated up to AI itself. So there's a trade-off here that we haven't really addressed, and that's still ongoing. So responsibility AI, like you say, is created by humans. It always begins and ends with humans in the chain of anything, because the engineers are humans and make decisions. What we're using CDR for is to think about that ethics by design, to take a back seat and think about what they are designing, and have they made the right decisions, not just doing it as somebody put there because we should. to actually think about what is the purpose, how would it be trusted if it goes wrong, like we said, by the company. If somebody puts something out there that hasn't been well designed and well thought through from an ethical perspective, and it caused a harm, such as we have cases where automation, because of the bias that somebody quite rightly mentions, there's a huge data gap there. To remove it and clean it properly around gender, around race, all sorts of things. We've all read the headlines. So this is a reaction to this, to actually take a step back and really think about what we're doing. And also about data as property. There's also discussions around self-sovereign identification that we looked at in some of our research, but there's also a trade-off that the technology isn't quite there to do this fully. There are companies working on, can we have a solution where we put our own individual data and own it in a box online on a cloud, and then we share it, as opposed to the companies are sharing it for us at the moment with third parties and making money off it. So all of the things that you've put on here are relevant, but we're still at stage where we're at crux of technology, innovation, and therefore what CDR does is put a pin in it and say, we really need to think before we take that next step. We really need to think about where we're going. Models aren't based on what you want to achieve rather than what has been seen before. Yeah, that's what I said. What we're doing is automating inequality because that's what we know, and we take the data and we're not asking the right questions. CDR is asking you to step back and ask the right questions, because otherwise we just automate the bias and the exclusion that's already gone on. So that's why some of us on the panel here are looking at financial inclusion and how we can marry that gap between those who are currently excluded, for instance, around KYC regulations, and how we balance that up. Debates around cashless society, as I said before, because cash is ultimately private and can't be tracked. If you do it on an app, everybody knows what you've been doing with your transactions. So I think what's coming up here, it's very apt. It needs to be clearer who owns the data, yes, because the big tech companies, as we've seen in front of the US Congress, we are still not clear what they are doing with your data. And if it is linked to you, then we're not sure what's happening. I don't know if you want to say a bit more, Patricia, on what's coming up on the board.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say any more about data, but thinking about the way that companies treat and the control aspects that one person says, I can only advise, and I think that's a really important point to note here, because a number of all people in organizations, whether they're designers, developers, deployers, whether they're cybersecurity, whether they're in the risk function, there's an element of, I can only go so far. And I think what's so important for CDR to be effective and how that can really get started in an organization is to get C-suite buy-in, to get management buy-in, so that they can think about, understand what really is their digital exposure here. What you can be in a position to do is explain, this is where you've got digital exposure, whether it's in the cybersecurity stratosphere, whether it's in the design, the development, deployment of the systems which you're protecting, whether it's in the respect of the data and how the data is being analyzed and being used then for advanced analytics, AI and machine learning. So and then putting that as kind of almost like a risk report to say, here's C-suite, here senior management, this is our digital exposure here. We need to be doing something about it and being more responsible. And I think that's where there's an element of the advice capacity can be more than just saying, I'm just doing my day job, I can only work within these four walls. The challenge I've seen with that is there were other organizations that felt that there were parts of their organization that said, well, I'm going to only work within my role and remit, that's out of my scope of employment. And where that's happened, they've really fallen down, whether that was Compass AI over in the US when it was a recidivism tool, and that had really serious issues in their own data science and the bias that was in that, or whether it's to more recently what's been happening in the Dutch quarters, whether it was the Siri system, the risk indicator system that they had, or the subsequent child welfare debacle that they've just had. Ultimately, what has happened is there were people who knew things were going on, that knew things weren't perfect, knew that there could be some digital exclusion, or that people could be biased, the system could produce biased results, but didn't speak out about it, or didn't speak out about it enough to bring that to the fore, which has left years and years and years of people having and suffering inequality. And in the case of the Holland example that I gave earlier on, it is about actually that had human rights impact. People were being, not being denied having child welfare benefits, and also in some cases, some people had their children taken away from them because of the poverty that they were and the negligence that they were being accused of, because of the system said that's what's happening. So that there's a lot of challenge there about, yes, you feel like you're in one small corner of the company, but how far can you seek to advise and document it? Make sure you've covered your own back, in the sense of making sure that you are pushing it and pushing it every level, because I think there's an element of individual responsibility here, but there's also an element of corporate responsibility. Johanna, do you have any comments on the board so far? Would you like to take anything forward?
Well, there's 2 post-its at the top. Are those general thoughts on all 4 categories, or are they looking to be dragged under any, just checking in on that? Feel free to move them or leave them if they're general comments.
Looks like one's the freemium versus premium model, is that right? And in terms of metadata and showing behavioral attributes and things like that, I think that can be. I'll put it under responsible AI and in between responsible AI and data ethics, actually. And there is again, this is more of a philosophical question actually for organisations to think, well, if I'm offering a freemium model, how transparent am I being about my purpose that I'm offering my freemium model at? Explaining to individuals that, I get my money from advertising, I get my money from, targeting you because I'm using your metadata and your analytics data and your behavioral online information to provide greater services. But that makes me be able to provide you with a freemium model. It's this quid pro quo, this exchange, if you like, information exchange that's happening and trade-off. I don't think that has been as transparent as people or organisations would like to think. I think a lot of people have been kind of coerced into giving their consent in some of those areas as well, and whether or not that's even seen as proper and true consent because of the way that the system phrases these things at the point of the in-transit journey for the user that comes about. These are all challenging from a GDPR perspective, but also challenging from a philosophical perspective. But indeed, I have seen the premium where people can actually get a paid for service where they aren't tracked and traced and surveilled and the like. So yes, I think that comes into responsible AI and data ethics. But again, it's a responsibility piece. And as much as people need to be transparent and open and clear in their communications in plain language about what's happening in the freemium model, that also ought to be the same as premium for the premium model, because it just shows again the prime example of privilege. And if you pay for it, you get your privacy. If you don't pay for it, you don't get your privacy. So yeah, fundamentally philosophical there.
I think a final word just on greenwashing. Somebody's put up there. There is the possibility, like with CSR, that CDR could be washed because it does touch on ESG. But I think we have to use the mechanism that can be contextually adjusted to try and at least get the thoughts and feelings towards the more fairer system for using all of the new technology as well. So yes, we are at risk of greenwashing because that's human nature, but we really have to hold people to account. As I said at the outset, there is more expectation generally in society that corporates do the right thing. And there have been examples flagged up in the Financial Times, for instance, about green finance washing already occurring, but they're held up to account. So hopefully, it won't always be perfect. There'll always be somebody who will try and subvert the system, but at least the mechanism is there. And if we get it implemented, and like I say, there's a skill shortage around thinking in this manner, we can actually start to engender change.
Johanna, do you want us to move to the next Jamboard?
Yeah, go for it.
So this is where people think we're asking you your thoughts about whether you've heard any bad PR or societal impacts around not responsible AI and data ethics. Is this something that has impacted you, come on your radar? Has this affected your business that you work for, your employer, or your own business if you're here as a business owner? All thoughts on a post-it, please. presumably with Uber, that's where it was to do with the employee ranking and whether or not they were, or sorry, not employee, the delivery workers, gig economy delivery workers, who I think have actually been later decided that from a HMRC perspective, they might well be an employee, but whether or not they were selected and ranked for drives and for routes. And basically that was about almost firing by automation, really, because of the fact that they were then deranked or getting to the point of being delisted and then not being offered further work. So if that's the Uber one you're thinking of, yeah, absolutely. And that was a HR tool, you know, or essentially, or, you know, a workforce management tool, a workflow management tool. So it's important to think about how much of the inner workings of an organization can go public. Yeah, we all love the gorilla example. That was really, really poor show on the image labeling. Cambridge Analytica. Still suffering from Cambridge Analytica, all of us, I think. Yeah, I saw the kids' spyware tracking, interestingly, about, you know, home devices, Internet of Things, where people have got webcams, you know, nanny cams in their home. Even this week, I think there was another case of somebody's nanny cam being hacked and over the mic, a third-party stranger's voice coming in. So again, you know, cybersecurity is so important here, because otherwise that wouldn't have let someone be able to access that internet in that local area network or WAN, and or two to get into the device itself and recognize it and use its mic. So yeah, very, very scary indeed. Ring doorbells is a really interesting thing, and it's not just obviously Ring. It's any of those web-enabled, webcammed, Wi-Fi enabled devices that help with your home security. How much more surveillance is there around us? And interesting, on the one hand, it's security protection, ironically, for a building and for a family or for individual living on their own, or, you know, a block of housing. It could be a refuge, it could a women's or men's refuge, or it could be you know, a tenement block, housing block, you know, the landlord wanting to, you know, regulate who's coming in and out. It could be in a particularly difficult area. I know of surveillance and monitoring cams that go on in New York City in certain areas as part of a smart city initiative. And so, you know, things like Ring doorbells, you know, are really super important for raising up the digital twin and understanding what's happening in a city. But equally, it's about privacy, isn't it? And the core of, you know, what's being seen, what's being shared, what inferences are being taken about us, who's getting access to information. And with Ring doorbells, there has been also the idea that some of this information is or can be being shared with policing authorities and in law enforcement. And the same with Alexas, actually.
So Trish, on that topic of Ring doorbells, Phil dropped a comment about other doorbells being available.
Absolutely.
No, I actually think that's interesting, because we're asking you all, has this affected your trust in this business? So you all are dropping Uber and Google, and I'd like to know, and Marriott, are you still using these services? Has this, you know, encouraged you to look for the services? Let's get into the trust a little bit. If you just want to drop post-its under the categories, like next to Uber, like, yes, I'm still using Uber, or I've gone with a different doorbell, just let us know. Yeah.
And don't forget British Airways there.
Yeah, British
Anyone
Airways.
wants to confess that you're still using these services.
But
I'd like to shout out to surveillance capitalism as well, around Zuboff's work, and that is an interesting one about, as I mentioned earlier, about big tech, etc. And you know, how tech is being used that we don't know about. So the analogy there in surveillance capitalism is they are the puppet masters, the big tech companies, and we're merely puppets who are being drawn into a potentially dystopian future. So it's interesting that these are coming up. And indeed, when you said government bans Huawei but widely used by councils, yeah, it's interesting where I think somebody mentioned before on the previous slide, where you get that issue between profit making and purpose. It's a cliche, but it still comes into play in decisions that people are making, and that's why CDR can maybe just make you stop and think about it a little bit more. And
I'm just going to talk into this traffic accidents caused by autonomous vehicles, because while I was in San Francisco earlier this year, just plugging my EU AI green paper that I've launched, aside from that, there were 2 traffic incidents with autonomous electric vehicles while I was in San Francisco. And one was a data issue, because unfortunately the homelessness issue is very high in San Fran and certain parts of San Fran. And there was a backpack in the side of the road, and the vehicle didn't have the image recognition to understand that was a backpack, not a person or a bike or another vehicle. So it stopped, and it stopped dead. And that then caused tailback. And so that was one issue. And actually, that same week, I was there for a couple of weeks. I don't think it was that incident, but a vehicle had stopped in a very similar way because it didn't recognize something in the road, and caused 2 fire engines not to be able to get to their place of incident whilst that vehicle was stopped. So it's just halts all the traffic. So it's not just about one system being relevant and clear and responsible and ensuring its accuracy. It's that way up between accuracy, i.e. not running over a suspicious object that could be a human being, rather than it actually being a backpack, and the importance of having the right amount of data to train these AI, essentially AIs on wheels. But then also the other incident that happened during my time in San Francisco was that many autonomous vehicles of a particular autonomous vehicle provider went down because they are remotely accessed. They had to access their security. The security requires them to access a cloud-based server. The server went down, so the integrity and the availability of that service ceased, and that meant all the cars stopped dead. They couldn't report back. And so really interesting that, and all of these vehicles at all times had a safety driver. Can I just be clear on that as well? But there was no one pushing that car to the side of the road. You know, that should come as standard training, really, shouldn't it? But yeah, absolutely the importance of these things, and how where small incidents can have really large ramifications. And agree that I have seen the stats that most severe road traffic accidents have been caused by humans rather than by autonomous electric vehicles. But we haven't really got the data yet for the autonomous electric vehicles. Wait till they're more widespread, I would say. Karen, Johanna, any more comments, or should we go to the next slide?
I think there's a question there about trust as well. It's interesting. In many cases, businesses stop the problematic practices only when they receive public attention, which is true. And this, I think, goes back to the prior slide about sustainability. Sustainability practices, if they're, for instance, like Amazon, were found to be putting a lot of new products that just didn't sell into a skip, which could have been recycled into society. But so, of course, once that happens, then they revert and try to repair that trust. It does affect trust, and it like with the British Airways example, Trish, what happened there was the press actually released that there'd been a breach of people's data first, before, like myself, then got an email about 3 days later to say that I was one of the British Airways passengers whose data had unfortunately probably been in the data that was leaked. How does that affect trust? Well, it makes you think that they should have contacted you first before the press actually notified you, and a quicker response in 3 days would have been good. And that makes you less likely to use that service, and then they have to work hard to rebuild that. We do have a problem still with industries, malfeasant behavior that then comes back to bite them. But I think because expectations are changing, that we're no longer tolerating as much as society, and social media response to organizations is so quick and immediate that they are more likely, but not always, to respond very quickly to public attention, because they know, as with the pound, it will drop their shares pretty quickly, and people will go and use other services. So trust is a central thread running underneath all of this, particularly for CDR. How does it affect trust? How about reputational damage, etc., which companies you would think would be interested in. But trust is a very subjective construct in society, and looks very different in terms of what is trustworthiness in a technological perspective that we've been researching, because it's more about accuracy and efficiency rather than actual social trust. So the question of trust is still one that's being researched, but is infinitely human and will vary constantly. Should we move on to the next one?
And I think with a lot of these things, they could have been abated had there been a further layer of oversight within the organisation, a bit more strategic and consequence scanning thinking in the organisation across piece, across products and services, from end to end of the solution, so as to think about actually what could happen here, what's the worst case scenario, and also that crisis comms planning, really having, a clear project plan for what's going to happen if, and more, dare I say, when there's a data breach or a security breach. And just going back to that talk one, I absolutely know about a certain ISP that I managed to get breached by twice. And I found out through the breach rather than through the organisation. It was only months and months later when they actually told you that had happened. Right, Johanna, over to you for this slide deck.
Yep, well, it's up. So more of your thoughts, breaking it down. What's your thoughts on the latest climate science? And then to think about, does this affect your day-to-day practice? In what ways should it? Let's see.
Interesting to take the thought from earlier on that actually a lot of the bottom line profit is being thought about and getting the product or service to market more than maybe this is the carbon footprint and the climate cost of that product or service. That was something that was stated earlier on. So very interesting to get thoughts on that in relation to your cybersecurity day-to-day practice. Seems this might be a little bit more challenging, actually.
We're doomed. Yeah.
Oh, don't say that.
That's what it says on the sticky study. But I mean, for those of you who've grown up with David Attenborough like myself, then perhaps we've gone past the tipping point.
So where doomed person hasn't changed any of your day-to-day practices? You don't have to answer me. You could just pop in and post it. Okay.
This comes to the core of being responsible as well, thinking not just about, the information intelligence you're guarding, and of which you're a guardian, but also thinking about, right, okay, what's the wider digital impact of our products and services? Does every download have a footprint, in the same way that when you book a train now or book a flight, you can have the opportunity to offset your carbon footprint. I've started to see with some online providers and online shops that they say, actually, this this transaction cost X in terms of carbon footprint, and or they're saying that they're trying to offset their carbon footprint. Would you like to spend X amount of money to offset that, or buy a tree, or create a more sustainable environmental area that they're protecting? That's really brilliant. And just thinking about that, having not flown for 6 years, or certainly drive more slowly, driving less, has the organisation got as a digital responsibility what it is for home working, remote working, access to systems? It's not just the load that the system's bearing, but the load that the employees are bearing. Are they quantifiably and showing measurements and metrics that there's an opportunity for people to say, right, instead of flying stateside or flying into Europe, I want you to do a Zoom or WebEx, or Teams call, get people in a variety of locations on a digital room, and what that load is in terms of carbon footprint and environmental and climate impact versus what it would have been to get all those people in a physical, tangible room. Yes, there's something for a face-to-face meeting, but actually from a policy perspective as an organization, how much is being done to that, and what impact is that then having on its physical buildings, and the security of those physical buildings as well.
I also wanted to throw out, because this is about cybersecurity. I mean, what has been mentioned in the workplace about climate science in relation specifically to cybersecurity has been anything, nothing, and has it been brought up in your day-to-day practices or meetings around, as we mentioned before, a new IT green strategy coming in? How do we look at our servers? Is there anything that you've witnessed, or do you think it's still pretty nascent in terms of cyber, and it's something that perhaps this has sort of raised your awareness of some of the concerns and issues that you might have to face in the future, or think about more cognitively every day? I'd like to know that, particularly as cybersecurity specialists, etc. Has it actually joined like the narrative of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. Has somebody in your organization said this is the cost of our cybersecurity in climate terms and in sustainable terms, and this is what we're doing to abate that? Or we're deliberately using a certain, data warehouse or cloud provider and system that deliberately for its sustainability aspect. Yeah, thanks for your honesty there. Not having given much consideration. It's hard when focusing on the day job, isn't it? Absolutely. You're so focused. People can be so focused on getting the product service safe, secure, and not thinking about the wider digital consequences. I think somebody mentioned third-party providers earlier on that they use to help keep their systems secure or identify any security threats. And it'd be interesting to think about, the load that they bear, in terms of climate impact and what that means for the wider cybersecurity system. And particularly as we're finding more and more AI systems like general adversarial networks being used to identify threats and constantly try and pen test, a system, or kind of find loopholes and places for it to breach that stronghold. It would the load that they bear and the energy costs that they have, it would be very interesting for people, or for there to be some thought leadership on that and actual metrics.
So it's interesting, like I say, that someone's put there that they've never come across the considerations of it at all. So maybe at least a takeaway when we get through the rest of the presentation, I'll just be thought-provoking, if nothing else, and just reflect how you change. So I think we're back over now.
Move to the next slide.
Yeah, I think we could go to the next board. Right, so this board is just about Trish and Karen were talking about CDR. You may have known that term before, but the things seemed familiar. You all had a lot of comments on the responsible AI, data ethics, and sustainability. So just thinking about all of this now, is it something you do talk, again, put the post-its under the headers, to friends, your professional network, your customers, your family? Is it something you would want to, you would not want to? Just let us know.
It would be really good to know if one of the key takeaways from today was that it's raised your awareness and you're going to feed that back to your organisation or firm. I think, and or indeed your professional network, I think these would be important takeaways for us if you weren't aware of CDR and responsible AI prior to, and sustainability aspects prior to this conversation.
Yeah, or maybe just pop in some post-it notes under these categories of, would you want to talk about CDR with your company, or responsible AI sustainability? Maybe any of these in particular. Just pop them under instead of a yes, no, if that helps.
Well, that's a resounding yes, isn't it?
It would be really interesting for some people. It may well be sector dependent as well. You know, cybersecurity and financial services is, and obviously sustainability in financial services is getting a lot more press time at the moment versus, you know, cybersecurity and digital identification and sustainability. And digital identity is a fundamental part of obviously financial services, but also so many other access to goods and services and products and services online and offline for a number of organizations and people, and particularly thinking about government access. So, you know, are there conversations in your particular sector? Schools has been mentioned as well. Absolutely. I think, you know, ed tech, you know, and the need for cybersecurity about protecting not only the schools from vulnerability, but also the individual pupils from vulnerability, and thinking about sustainability of schools and the wider edtech ecosystem. Absolutely. But
yeah, indeed, I did a bit of a series with Innovate Finance around asking students and, you know, pupils to think about their data and the ethics about who might have it. And what's happening when they just share everything on social media because they've grown up with it and it's more a norm for them. So yeah, I think this is good. Yeah.
And if people could perhaps say some of the sectors that they're relating to for their cybersecurity, that would be really helpful as well. Another area where sustainability is being brought about and thought about more readily is perhaps in buildings infrastructure management, particularly with digital twinning and smart cities. So, you know, not least are cities being designed and buildings being designed with sustainability in mind, you know, kind of energy inducing glass and building frontages so that they can be used and stored as used as batteries for storing energy. You know, you're hearing about all that, but to kind of socket control and energy consumption within the building, and, you know, automated lights and switch turn off. You know, we've got all of that going on in behind the scenes that also needs security. So if anyone's in digital twinning or in business and buildings infrastructure management or smart cities, that would be also helpful information. Yeah, so two-factor authentication and multi-factor authentication access control is, you know, really, really useful and responsible for access to, you know, particularly financial services where it has been more and more mandated. But you know, in other industries, you're seeing this coming online, particularly, you know, for example, people who use kind of cloud services that, you know, they need to access those cloud services. Then you've got multi-factor authentication and the use and increasing use of independent digital identity providers to help identify from a multi-factor perspective, and the use of codes and texts and emails and all sorts of authentication methods and facial recognition as well. All about being responsible, isn't it? Fantastic. Do we have any more takers? Or should we go to the next screen?
Notice customers are blank. I don't know any reason about why with that. Is it just the areas people are in? They don't is that they're not really interacting with customers directly? I think that's just my last question on that, Trish, and then we can move on to the other slide if anyone wants to take it.
All those good old cybersecurity questionnaires. Yeah, that's probably the only interaction people with cybersecurity actually get, I think, or anyone who's in risk gets with, and having been in a risk function myself in the past, with customers directly. Yeah, absolutely. And how can you verify and authenticate that what they actually tell you is true? Challenging.
I think that was a good wrap up to this board. We can go on to the next. Yep, so this is about the organization you work with or the teams you work with, what actions are being taken towards things similar to CDR, responsible AI, and sustainability. Let us know are they doing any new surveys, any new practices, any outreach community programs, any green reporting? Let us know.
Has anyone seen or written or read an explainability statement recently?
Are there any old practices in place that were there when you joined that falls under these categories? Maybe that we're a little burnt out with the boards. Karen and Trish, I don't know. Perhaps we could just jump to board 9.
Yeah.
And let's wrap it up. I think let's skip this board because we didn't get feedback on anyone before. Let's just go to board 9. Yeah. And we'll close it with that. Well, the jam boards will close. So yeah, let us know if you've had any training concerning responsible AI, training concerning data ethics or sustainability, or any training you would like to do in these areas. Drop them in. Would you like training in these areas? Have you seen any you're thinking of signing up for? Who do we think should be trained in these areas?
We certainly don't want the cybersecurity professionals to be left out of the loop. That is the important message, I think, from this board today. I'm going to stop sharing, but please do feel free to put some thoughts on the board. I saw you get trained by the kids. Yeah, that's great. I'm going to go back to the slide deck while people still put their
While Trish is back to the slide deck, I mean, does anyone mind just popping into the chat like what your roles and stuff are, so we could just get a little more contextualization here, if that's okay. But go ahead, Trish. You can pop it in the chat just for me.
So I think it's back over to me. So resoundingly, I think we've seen some of the challenges that you're all facing, and you're not alone in the CDR stratosphere, are things like that there isn't an understanding of the importance of taking responsibility, that your leaders, your business leaders, your corporate leaders aren't seeing the urgency for this or the need for this, that the seeded need isn't there, and they're not making the change because there's no legislation, no other compliance impetus for them. Perhaps even in some cases, they're seeing it as a bit counterproductive to business, and the purpose is about doing the business and not about maintaining wider societal, ethical, environmental, and technological, and assessing those impacts. Maybe perhaps either you or some of your business leaders have felt a bit overwhelmed by these concepts, you know, whether it's responsible AI, data ethics, corporate digital responsibility, but that because there's a lack of guidance, they know that these principles exist and these things are out there, but they don't necessarily know how to adapt them to their day-to-day contexts. And like today, you know, we've struggled in amongst the audience to think about, you know, where is this sitting and what training is there and what guidance has there been for cybersecurity. And so it's still being seen as very nascent, when actually these principles and the kind of ethical concepts and problems have been around for years and years. You know, some of the earliest principles were back in 2018, 2017 even, and that's a challenge. And also some of the other challenges I think we're seeing is about this theory and putting it into day-to-day practice and what this means to you and to your jobs. So what CDR does for cybersecurity and what cybersecurity does to make the ecosystem have purpose and trust and be responsible and be ethical and be thinking about the sustainable impact is about having availability. You are making services and systems and products available in real time, whether that's information, whether that's insight that's being shared, and whether that insight or information is being used for automated decision making, to assist outcomes, whether it's humans in the loop or humans not in the loop, and it's wholly automated. It's about availability. And so if you aren't, and if your cybersecurity measures are failing, then the availability fails, and there will be ongoing consequences. It's about integrity. So actually being able to evidence the access and the controls that you've got in place for your server stacks and for the software and the systems, and who's having access, and to evidence that. But it's also about the evidencing of the information for the decision making as well, and ensuring that that information, that intelligence that you're protecting from your through your cybersecurity measures and through your policies and procedures and practices, is making sure that there's no change to either historic record, there's no change to criminal records, maybe health records, insurance records, legal records, property ownership, as we know with land registry information going online. And also about, we've mentioned about multi-factor authentication, but about digital identification and the need for, or the increasing need of IDPs and passport controls being online and being made available digitally. Cybersecurity is about confidentiality, and trade secrets. We talked about information intelligence that will have an impact on end users because there's data protection in there when it's personally identifiable information. But this is also about maintaining a business, not just its business reputation, but maintaining that business has integrity, that they have a product that's secure, and they can continue to sell it. There's a reason why Coca-Cola's recipe has never been found, because it's a trade secret and it's being kept confidential and being very kept proprietary through the protection mechanisms, whether that's of cybersecurity and other access controls. And the other reason for importance of cybersecurity and the responsibility taking that's involved here is because of insider trading. So that could have a wider impact on the stock exchange, or anti-competitive practices that can have a bigger impact for a business, not just from a customer end user perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective with the Competition and Markets Authority. If someone had mentioned ad tech 10 years ago and the anti-competitive practices there, or the price comparison tools and the potential anti-competitive and discriminatory price discrimination practices there, people would look to you rather blankly, but it was there and it was an issue, and it has come to light. But these are confidentiality, trade secret aspects, all of which need security and being protected, and the reasons for the information that's inside that organization. You've got data protection. I think we will all remember, maybe not with a fondness, maybe with a hands in one's face, and about WannaCry. And what that meant, that brought pretty much the entirety of the NHS to a standstill. Many other organisations connected with the NHS to a standstill. Anyone that was government got targeted, and that was through simple phishing, largely. And that meant that it made vulnerable employee records. So thinking about personal data from that perspective, not just about your end customers, medical records, and it brought down the system. It froze it, so that it meant that there was no timely access to data. So from a healthcare perspective, this wasn't just a data breach. This was I can't deliver services, healthcare services, in an accident emergency suite that's critical and in my critical care unit. Pumped. So that was really scary, and I think that brings to bear how clearly the need is for digital responsibility in the area of cybersecurity. We talked about privacy earlier on, and the smart home devices. We're seeing the nanny cams and the doorbells of unnamed branding. And somebody also mentioned geolocation movements from mobile phone providers, or indeed the companies that are running the networks. And the reason why there's some geopolitical game playing about the connectivity of those networks and who can listen or not listen into those networks. So we've also talked about physical security and safety, whether that's mobility more generally, whether that's autonomous trains, autonomous or planes to the degree when they go on autopilot, but autonomous electric vehicles. And Karen mentioned this earlier on about the economic enfranchisement inclusion. A denial of service attack on a financial services system may well mean that this doesn't allow someone to get access to benefits or access to money, may not be able to make e-money payments, or that they can't receive e-payments in a timely fashion. That may well mean, that may well be the difference between I can eat today or not today, depending on where the person is in the wider society. So these have true and real societal impacts, and particularly if they're sustained. This isn't going to be something that just happens over a day and it's resolved. More often than not, these things happen. There's a denial of service attack and people are left without backup for weeks on end, and we only have to look at the benefit system and some of the issues that have been around the calculations and access to that benefit system that's been allowed, that have left people wanting for all sorts of things, whether it's been housing or otherwise, and financial resources. So, and then we've talked about a little bit about the environmental safety, the criticality of cybersecurity to prevent against the sabotage. Very timely. We did write these slides before yesterday's and the day before the incident. Sabotage of critical infrastructure, gas pipelines, for example, and what that then means. It isn't just about a geopolitical gameplay here, potentially. That it is also about, look at all that gas that's now being leaked into the ocean and into the stratosphere. What is that leak? What is that going to be doing? And that is a physical cybersecurity, a physical issue, so security and safety issue, but also a cybersecurity issue. So why is this all important? Well, I hope what we've said today, it speaks for itself. It's about the corporate digital responsibility, taking responsibility for all aspects, all those 7 areas, having such an important aspect, not only on the end-to-end business products and services, but all tenets of an organization, not just cybersecurity. But I think we've seen clearly that cybersecurity has a very a big role to play in this, that perhaps hasn't had its importance brought into light as much as it ought to have been. And then, Karen, I don't know if you want to speak into some of this as well, but we've got, it's about trust. A chink in the chainmail, a cybersecurity incident, a data breach, a access to your system, an access control issue, physical or cyber, either way, it's trust. Easily lost, hard won. And what trust needs is robustness, resilience, and reliability. And these are all the principles go towards about building that through purpose. If an organization says that we want to be a robust, resilient, and reliable service or product to our end customers, whether they're businesses or consumers, this is all about building trust.
Yeah.
Karen.
I was just going to say a little bit about some of the research. We're just about to launch an ethical toolkit that we discussed and built over the last 4 years that looks into a lot of these aspects. So, what is trust like from an engineering, AI, machine learning process? And we've got like a chain of trust paper. Again, there's lots more research to do on that, but there's actually open resources that you can use that we put into a GitHub, that once we launch the ethical toolkit, I'm just working with our marketing department to get that launched. So watch this space and you'll be able to read through it. And it covers a lot of these areas, as well as looking at robo-advice and also maybe looking at fairness as a service that we could potentially do, and also financial inclusion. But trust is a key thing. And it was one of the reasons why I got initially involved in looking at CDR, but also what does trust look like for humans? What does trust look like for technology? And how do we make that come together, because reputational risk involves trust on both sides. So if you want to flick forward to the CDR, and I can just finish off. Yeah. So when explaining like the societal, economic and environmental impact, do you want to come to the first slide, Patricia?
There we go.
So like you say, you can see these 3 interacting areas, and I won't bore you by reading all of it, but like you say, you've got trust and impact and purpose always at the center of it. We will share the slides so you can digest these a bit more in full. But what we've been working with some companies is, when you look at one, purpose and trust, about publishing a digital responsibility code. And in your areas of cybersecurity, this is where you could kind of think about how you can bring it into the workplace. And Johanna, thank you, has just put in a link to the actual toolkit that's available online. And as we go around, we went through the tenets, and this links into the manifesto if you want to make your companies aware of the manifesto and how you sign up. I say it's all voluntary people that Patricia and I are part of that group around corporate digital responsibility and raising awareness. But everything here that links together, everything that we've said, all the valuable work you do as the guardians of the cyberspace, this links into you thinking through each one of those, you know, how accessible are your products? Have you tried to get rid of as much bias as possible, because humans are biased anyway. So you're never going to get rid of all of it. But also, how are you looking at sustainability? And the feedback we're going to take from this is that there's not much happening in the cybersecurity space throughout that digital supply chain, and it has to go through everything. And Phil's also put on there, there's also an ethical toolkit from his organization as well. And those combined and looking at CDR can actually help us think about how we move forward and touch on all these different bases, because we have to think about our societal well-being going forward. We've got economic issues at the moment around transparency. So companies need to step up and be really clear about what they're doing, and that the eco economy comes up first and foremost, that everything that they do meets the expectations of society, that it's not going to cause further damage. And also how you're going to address that with environmental IT strategy to push it forward. As we said, this is a real existential threat that we're actually forcing, and to get this into people's mindsets and think about how does it impact my daily role. If it's not, I need to start asking questions around it. And this is like I say, this isn't strict. You can take it and contextualize it. We're actually doing a pilot study with some organizations in Newcastle at the moment to say, you know, is it fit for purpose? How can we shape it to your context to make it work for you, keeping the key tenets, but how does it pan out in your daily lives? And it's actually raised issues that they never thought about before, about what they're doing within their company, but also by their company, by being involved in that whole digital supply chain and the unintended consequences that might arise that they never thought at the outset of what they were trying to achieve. So I think if we go on to the last slide, we've got key takeaways here. Is to think across all these 8 points. And I don't know if Patricia, if you want to add a bit more.
I'm happy to do that. So really, you know, appreciate that many in the room might not be empowered to help the organizations they work for find their principled approach. But I would ask that, you know, think about the impact of the digital on cybersecurity and in your day-to-day practices. Think about the principles that we've talked about today from the CDR. You know, transparency is a key one, you know, purpose and trust, and having an impact in thinking about the societal environmental impact. Take those away, bring them back to your organization, think about and help the organization find its principled approach. You know, and if that kind of soundbite gets home, you know, think about what that means in practice, you know, make them matter. You know, what could you think about ahead about what could you be doing in your day-to-day practices in your organization that would apply these principles and make them operationalized within your organization. And then I would say, you know, do some mapping, you know, do a gap analysis. You know, it's all well and good if you're a startup and, you know, it's all nascent, you're not having to retrofit, but actually as big businesses get bigger and they scale up and many large organizations, it's about getting the house in order and really understanding what is it you're doing, get the data, get the metrics, you know, map it, you know, understand it. You know, what are you doing already? You know, I could imagine that for many organizations, this has been thought of, but maybe not explicitly, and changes and decisions have been made to corporately to implement some practices, particularly, you know, on the sustainability side. Many organizations have sought to try and make some things happen, you know, even if it is, you know, swapping out paper towels for a dryer or vice versa, you know, depending on their impact, you know, use of tech refreshes and where they put the old devices and how you deal with legacy systems and things like that. So yeah, absolutely. But it's all part and parcel of the wider corporate digital responsibility. We mentioned today about consequence scanning. You know, some of these threats that we've identified, or the things that had big PR issues, were, you know, unknowns for some of those organizations, but they needn't have been if appropriate. appropriate layer of human oversight have been put in place, and also some consequence scanning and impact analysis. Be digitally and socially inclusive. Think about the impacts your digital services, the ones that you are helping to protect and to guard, are actually having on wider society. You know, are they including all stratospheres of society, or could it be that, you know, that they're excluding people who only have who don't have access to a certain device, or don't have access to a certain bandwidth? You know, it's just really thinking about some of those things. Talk about it. You know, we did say talk about your family down the pub, you know, with colleagues and professional networks. You know, really talk about it within your organisation. Get CDR known, get responsible AI practices thought about. Think about sustainability in your organisations. Where I say about thrive on feedback, you know, some of the best innovation comes from that feedback loop. And I think it's really important to think about, you know, is there a place where in your cybersecurity practice that could be better improved and made more responsible, and, you know, to build purpose and trust amongst other of the CDR principles, because of you engaging with your wider stakeholders, whether it's within your organization, with your customers, with your end users, consumers, if they where your products and services for the organization you work for ultimately land. So and think about, you know, your third party supply chain as well, you know, get some feedback on, you know, how helpful or unhelpful that their interaction has been with the cybersecurity questionnaire, for example, or had they thought about sustainability practices. So thrive on that feedback. And human oversight, I cannot stress enough, you know, we need humans in the loop, humans over loop, humans around the loop. I think in some of these cases, particularly those ones on the reputational damage, if only there had been some people, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, multifaceted, multi-layered in that organization, who could have joined the dots, you know, and actually really thought about this from a holistic systems thinking perspective, rather than just in the siloed business unit. I think that they would have, you know, HR systems having the impact that they've had, workforce management systems having the impact they had, you know, work distribution systems having the impact they've had, you know, these could have all been abated.
I just wanted to add a couple of things before you move on as well. Just around this, Trish and Trish is going to put up a slide of all the work that she does, and that's why we invited to collaborate with us on our university work, because of her vast expertise in this area. But also, we're both members of the Digital Responsibility Forum, which comes out of CDR, because I imagine a lot of you sitting there thinking, wow, this is a lot to take in. Where do we get the skills for this? So there is a service for that where you can access, because we were discussing, if you're a small business or a startup, you're not going to have capital to invest in somebody who's got the skills to actually advise you around CDR. So therefore, we've got a forum that you can access by going to the website. And also on recycling devices and products, I'm actually working with a couple of other ambassadors in the Northeast from the Digital Poverty Alliance to set up a business where we can take your devices, refurbish them to a certified level, and then distribute across the Northeast to needy school children and others. We're also looking at the category 16 to 24-year-olds as well, who tend to get left out of this loop. So there are ways to recycle and put this into your IT strategy, and we can reach out. So if you want to go on your last slide, Patricia, and you can just share with everyone all your breadth of experience and expertise.
Well, thanks so much. I was just, you know, I'm CEO of Beyond Reach Consulting Limited. For anyone who wants to find out more, you know, check me out on LinkedIn, feel free to reach out. But the three areas that I kind of mainly function in is responsible AI governance, I do ethic advisory, and, you know, capability and capacity building for impact investment, such as the likes we've been talking about today. So AI ethics training, involving standards, CDR, and ethics and ESG benchmarking. So yeah, do feel free to reach out if any of those ring a bell, or you feel the organisations might benefit from having a little chat. I think that's me and us. Thank you very much for all your attention and time today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know there's a lot to take in what's almost 2 hours, and hopefully it's thought-provoking, gives you some ideas to maybe turn over and take back, either in your personal lives or your internet or actual professional lives. Phil, I don't know if you want to say anything before we close.
Yeah, I'd love to. Just sorting out the technology here, but first of all, thank you. That was really, really good. a huge amount to think about. And to be honest, areas that we've talked on today that I've never really contemplated. It's going to be very difficult to think about energy consumption of cybersecurity apart from IT. So things, perhaps energy ratings on applications is what's needed, like along the lines of your fridge or your cooker, that kind of thing. So as an organization that has no customers per se or no employees, but as an organization that has influence, I think I just need to work out how we're going to do this. But look, this was a great event, and thank you very much for putting it on, and I'd love to continue to be part of this. I've remembered where the place is. It's Brinkburn Street Brewery tonight, 6 till 8, season finale. If you're around, please come down. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate it. Signing off. And as I said, you know, you've seen us on LinkedIn, reach out.
Yeah, and the recording and the slides I'll share with Phil, and that can be distributed around everybody who's attended today. Okay, thanks very much.
Bye-bye.